All right. Well, welcome everybody to the second day of MagentoLive UK. Hope you're having a good time so far. My presentation today is about migration from M1 to M2. Quick introduction about myself. So I'm a business solutions architect with the Expert Consulting Group based out of Dublin, Ireland. So I come from a long history of working with e-commerce projects, from technical to the business side, and I've been working in recent past with the merchant beta program of Magento 2. So my job, me and my project manager, Noel, were part of every beta implementation that happened between July and December. So what this presentation is a bit of knowledge sharing of what our experience was with that process. We have taken it and produced a recommendation that you'll see here, as well as an offering that ECG ourselves, as a consulting service, are providing to our customers. So what I'm going to talk about today is basically our process, what we recommend you go through, what you will need to do to have a successful migration. So when you're looking at a upgrade scope and, well, first let me actually, in the room, can you raise your hands? Let's see if you show of hands if you're on the business side of things. If you're a business user, merchant, right? Yep, yep. So then technical side, if we have the technical people in the room, right? Great, so technical people, this is your slide. This is all that's involved in an upgrade, right? Code and data, it's simple. Well, I think what we've got from a product point of view, we've taken these key challenges and created open source tools that you can use to do this migration. First, from the data side, you've got your database, what's in your Magento 1 community or enterprise site. Take the data migration, feed it into your new database. From the code side, you've got our framework. You don't need to upgrade that. We upgrade that. Third-party extensions, responsibility of your vendors. Custom modules and custom themes are the work that makes your site special and what you're going to need to migrate. We've got this code migration tool available today, again, on GitHub. So this is open source and available. There's any active development is going on within our team on these tools, but please participate in this environment. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, and I'm involved with the projects online. But what I really want to talk about today, in addition to these tools and the technical process of Magento 2, is preparation and what goes into an actual successful migration. So what we recommend are really these 7 key steps, right? So analysis, strategy, they kind of go together. They're happening in the very beginning of the project that leads into development. Once you've got those plans, you can then start your development process. You get into QA, staging, UAT, and production. So if you get all of these 7 right, you will have a successful migration. And this is what we require for our side, for our clients. So analysis and strategy. This is looking at your current environment, your code base, your requirements. This is a strategy document, and I'll be referring to strategy documents throughout the presentation, where I talk about having a strategy. What I mean is actually a written document or something, whether it's a wiki page or a PDF or a document or a ticket in your ticketing system or an epic story. I think it's important to just have it as a reference that any member of your team can refer to, because there's key moments throughout the project that this is going to be very important. First, of course, is requirements. So do you have any? Are they written down? You'll know, of course, if you've been working with Magento today, you might have launched 3-4 years ago. You've since perhaps had a good requirements document back then, but there's been a lot of work that's gone on in the meantime. Is there a central place that you can refer to your requirements? Can you take some time right now to combine those together, to consolidate them and prepare them? Do you have customizations that you just don't need anymore? Some of the things that are in a site could be legacy and old. Can we get them out? What are those M1, M2 features that you're going to use? So this is a difference, of course, of whether you are, perhaps you're on Community Edition today and you're going to Enterprise 2.0. There's a whole bunch of features that are new to you, so can you define them? Do they have third-party or extension equivalents in your code base today? And can they be removed and replaced with native behavior? What are your desktop and mobile requirements? So as we're getting into the theming and development side of this. What are your requirements for responsive design, for mobile, and how will it be tested? So all of these things are going to lead throughout the rest of these pages. So as I referred to, that new feature strategy. So you've got the things that are new in Magento 2, or maybe just new to you. So if you haven't used the gift cards functionality yet, or wish list wasn't turned on your site for some reason, or if you had a third-party implementation of promotions, can you go to a native promotion in Magento 2? But always go through the demonstration process. So I think so key to our discovery and sharing of the capabilities of the new platform is to be demonstrated to your business users. Through our through our merchant beta, what we saw a lot of projects that were able to remove third-party customizations and go to native. Or things like Ajax add to cart, right? That stuff is native now. You don't need to use a third-party extension. Color swatches, like from 1.14 to 2.0, you've now got that built in. Visual merchandiser. And a lot of the admin customizations that you might have done in your previous site are now supported by the actual core architecture. Columns and sorting and filters are all automated across many of the important grids. So here's where you get really familiar with your code. Code analysis and code audit. This is what we recommend. You create a functional requirements and a functional breakdown of what each extension in your code base does. So is it a third-party extension, like we described before? Is it still used? Is it available to be go back to native? Do you have those custom modules that are in your site? What do they really do? Do they connect, and what are their dependencies? How do they work without, relate to other extensions in your system? So I think when you're looking at these analysis steps, this is going to feed into your strategy coming forward. Oh, so of course, JavaScript as well. JavaScript has a way to hide your business logic throughout your templates and perhaps in other places of your site. Very important to keep track of those JavaScript requirements and any business logic that might be in those templates. Identify it and make a plan for each one of these, because you're going to need it in the future. So on that third-party side, it's pretty straightforward. You've got a full inventory of what's there. Are you going to remove it? Are you going to go to native? Are you going to upgrade it? Is that Magento 2 version ready for today? Does it do everything in its Magento 2 version that it did for you in Magento 1? You'll see a lot of extensions are already available and continuously being released by our third-party partners. And there's a large selection already available on the marketplace and also in the open source community. So we have an initiative within the organization to promote the development of these Magento 2 extensions. If you have any particular extensions that are very important to your site and aren't yet available, please share with myself and the team here on site. One thing I would say on the return to native side, when we saw in the merchant beta experience, is the import and export associations of Magento 2, especially Magento 2 Enterprise, allow scheduling of exports and feeds that can be created in a much more powerful way that can perhaps reduce some of your third-party requirements. So that custom module strategy, this is what's your site, right? So the stuff that you guys have customized over time, are you going to remove it or migrate it? Are you going to consolidate it? I think when we talk about the migration tools in the future, we know it's a tool that will take your code from here to convert it to Magento 2 style code. What can you do beforehand? Do you have that catalog module? What does that thing even do? It's probably, maybe it's your biggest extension and it doesn't have a feature list that's simple and straightforward to it. Can you take it and break it apart into pieces? Or maybe you've already broken your modules into many pieces that don't need to be in 6 or 7 different components. Can you consolidate them? So this is where we recommend you make a plan on what you're going to do with these customizations, because we know you'll need to give them attention in Magento 2. Theme analysis, this is where we've taken those requirements of what's your responsive design requirement, how are you going to do your theming. The themes aren't migrated with the tools, so there's just a lot that's new to Magento for the theming perspective. We've got a completely new responsive foundation in Magento 2. You know, you've got things like required JS and new JavaScript techniques, less CSS or Sass if you're going that direction. So what is your plan for your theming? We've seen a lot of larger sites that may have a large internationalization plan or globalization where you need to take a single theme and roll it out across multiple countries. What's your strategy going to be to keep that theme as concise as possible? Perhaps it isn't today. You evolved with your Magento 1 site in a way that wasn't quite as centralized as you'd like to be. Is this your opportunity to go back to a more structured approach? So I think, again, supported devices, responsive breakpoints, these are the things that so important to a mobile site and important to have them documented. Again, as your front-end resources are going through their development process, they'll be able to refer to this document. But like I said, the code is not everything. So you've got your things like your integrations, the information that's in your database, your business processes, your infrastructure, your environments, and your testing requirements. So we recommend you have to look at those integrations. So do you have that high-level view of your integrations? Do you have that system landscape which can point everybody towards what is your CRM, what is your ERP, where are your orders going? How does your email marketing work? Is there already a diagram, or is there something that can be created? What is your integration approach? So we're using flat files, CSV, SOAP API, REST API, whatever you have, document them and keep them centralized so you are able to make these decisions on what's going to happen with these. Will you leverage some of the new Magento 2 capabilities like I described before, the feed management with imports or exports, the new RabbitMQ integration technique of doing more asynchronous queuing? Will you take this time to re-architect your existing integration? Information migration. So this is what we talked about, that database migration tool. You've got a lot of data besides just your MySQL database. You've got media. You might have content within your database, things like layout updates, other logic that is part of your data. How much of there is there? And how long will it take to do the migration? If you look, as we talk about in the tool, there's a concept of incremental data migrations. So you can do one full transfer, and it then sets up triggers in your production database to keep track of what's now new from the last time it ran, and then you'll be able to run those incremental updates. But importantly, what is it going to take? How long will it take? Create a clear plan that's step by step. What's your migration strategy going to be? What's involved? Script as much as possible. Create a plan that's step 1, step 2, step 3, and people that are assigned to it. And practice. Practice is key because it gives you that overall picture of how long it's going to take, what's going to be, of course, if you have any errors or any problems with it, you'll be able to get them solved. And it's just key to understanding what it's going to take to do your migration. I think as I pointed out with those triggers, it's important to mention that the data migration tool does affect the production database or the source database of what you're going to be migrating. So careful there, do some careful analysis, take backups of the database, and again, practice. On that data migration tool, some of the basic statistics here, you can go from Community Edition 1.6 and Enterprise Edition 1.11 forward. We've got in our beta program, and since that project, I've come across multiple questions from people who have older editions, right? 1.10, 1.9 Professional Edition. So how do you approach that? And what our best experience was so far was to, you've got your database that is your Magento 1.10 database. Take your code out of the way. You can't use the migration differential process, but you can upgrade your schema to 1.11. So if you're at 1.10, get to the closest supported version by the tool using our native schema upgrade scripts. So if you're install 1.11 on your on your database, upgrade it. Now you've got the 1.11 database that you can migrate with the tools. It's a little kludgier, but if you've got a quite old database, that's the way you've got to go today. Infrastructure, right? So as we know with Magento 2, there's a lot that's, not a lot, but I mean, it's a modern upgrade to the stack. Things like PHP 7, Varnish, SSL termination, because Varnish doesn't handle HTTPS. How does that affect your layout? what are your hosting choices going to be? Are you going to take this opportunity to go to cloud or go to a different provider or a different setup? The deployment process is different from Magento 2, right? So we know if you've done some, well, actually, quick question, raise of hands if anybody, is anybody underway with a Magento 2 migration right now? Yeah, okay. And anybody who's planning in the next 6 months to do an M2 migration? Right, great. So as you've been researching this process, I'm sure you know that the deployment process of Magento 2 is slightly different. We've got a concept of compilation. The dependency injection has a compiling step. You've got view file materialization, where you have your CSS, your JavaScript, which needs to be published to your production server. All of these things can impact your deployment process. If you look at them from a simple perspective of running each of these steps in production, you're talking about possibly 5-10 minutes of downtime with a deployment. Is that even acceptable? A lot of our clients, that's not. You need to look at creating a build that can be published as quickly as possible, reducing your downtime during those deployments. But infrastructure as a whole, we know we've got PHP, MySQL, and caching. These things are available as basically out of the box configurations. We've noticed MySQL 5.6, PHP 7, relatively straightforward, but we do have a white paper coming soon on the topic of tuning your environment, getting ready for Magento 2, all the steps that are required, and what we recommend for handling some of the challenges that come with this new stack. But if you don't want to deal with all that infrastructure, is this the chance to look at Magento Enterprise Cloud Edition? So if you've heard here at the show or information that was released at Imagine in April in Vegas, you've got our new product, the Cloud offering, which takes care of a lot of this for you, right? So as a developer and as a business owner, you're just concerned with your Magento code. You're committing your Magento project into our cloud system, and the cloud is handling the deployments. It's also able to create some environments. So if you are, as a developer, you need to create a new dev environment, you can take a snapshot of your production environment and have an additional area for developing. So very compelling on Magento Cloud. This is one of my key things that I think is when I reference a strategy for environments, this is what your team's plan is for moving code from today to launch. So going from your development environments, your staging environments, how you're going to do your UAT, what is your production environment, are you doing a pre-production? Your team should be able to understand exactly how the code is going to move throughout this process. And if you're going to Magento 2, what happens about the Magento 1 environment? How you're going to need to support it. Will you be using the same equipment? So if so, that should point out issues with requirements for PHP 7 and 5, MySQL. So what are you going to do to leverage these tools? Test plan, right? So this is something that we really need to see, and similar to that requirements level, you want to have this fully documented on what your process is going to be. It is everything from the developer side, whereas you as a developer know I need to create unit tests for my code and I need to create integration tests for how it interacts with the framework, all the way up to end-to-end integration testing that needs to be done in order to define a successful project. So what we see with these, who's going to be doing them, what's going to be doing, how is it going to be tracked? Will you use something like Selenium or some other test framework within Magento? Will you be leveraging the Magento out-of-the-box test cases? Do you execute the entire test suite of Magento during your deployment process, during your build process? What is your plan for testing? So as we know, Magento 2 ships ready for testing. The Magento team has been executing their development for the last couple of years on Magento 2 in a test-driven way. So our requirements, our definition of done from a development perspective is unit tests and integration test coverage is available. What's yours going to be? Will you use continuous integration? Will you have a deployment pipeline that tests your code automatically? Again, that question of does it test the entire test suite? How long will that take? Does it only test your custom requirements and your custom code? And what is your team's definition of done? Can you have that? It's going to be published so everybody knows exactly what they need to do. In addition to this, we also have in this suite, from the code base today, you'll see static code analysis, right? So PHP mess detector and code sniffer definitions from the core team, as well as some additional ones that my team at ECG are working on and published on GitHub. You've got the ability to connect your IDE directly to these rules and be performing static code analysis while you're actually developing. So very useful components that ship directly with the new platform. So business processes changes. So this is something that is key for your business users in the room and the people who will be using this thing from day to day. So we know Magento 2 has some changes, especially to its admin area. The admin has taken some really big steps forward. It's moved some things around, changed some menus. Do you need to document this, and can you prepare your business users, your merchandisers, your order management people, your customer service people that will need to work with this new platform? What do they need to do? Similarly, on a bigger picture, if you're looking at taking those integrations and changing the way the integrations work, do you need to define a new business process for a larger thing, like order fulfillment has certain steps in the fulfillment process, or the clearing process changed? Get those documented. So finally, after all of that preparation, it's time to work on the code. So as we described, we have this third-party tool. We have this tool of our own that's outside of the code base of Magento 2. It's its own thing. It leverages the Magento framework as it's built on. You'll see it takes it's good. It uses Composer to bring in the Magento framework in order to do its work. It affects these things in your modules. So you've got that directory structure that some things have changed, right? You've got some new names or some more definition of the directories within Magento 2. You've got your configuration, which could change again. Your events have been broken out in different ways. A lot of XML has been changed and improved. From the layout perspective of the front end on Magento 2, you've got layout files, and of course, your actual PHP code. A lot of changes within there. So the Magento migration tool is a tool for Magento developers. This is not something which should be expected to be used by somebody who doesn't have a lot of experience with Magento, right? It's going to do some of the work for you, but it's not going to do all the work for you. It works on the command line. This is something that you basically check out, configure, and execute against your code base. You'll see that we've done a lot of work for automating some of the routine things that have changed. So you've got a lot of plumbing has changed between Magento 1 and Magento 2. How an extension was built to connect. What are some of the conventions of modern PHP 7, things like namespaces, this type of stuff. It does a lot of these root changes for you, but your business logic inside of it will essentially remain the same. So you'll then just complete the connection using Magento 2. So this is a static code analysis tool. It doesn't execute your code. It's similar to Code Sniffer in that it's just tokenizing your code files and making these transformations to it. Once it's completed its work, you're going to still need to finish some changes to that code, do your testing and troubleshooting and fixing. You'll see the basic structure of the tool is available in its documentation, but you take your source on the left, your destination on your right, and the tool references Magento 1 and Magento 2 for its for discovery of classes and mapping of class from Magento 1 is now this in Magento 2. The tool uses these code bases right there. So how do you approach a code migration project? So like we said, this is not for your third-party extensions. You're going to use your third-party extension to, you're going to uninstall your existing M1 one and get your M2 project. So remove those. If you've got any changes to those core files, get them out of there. There's a lot of but as we analyzed some code bases, you might have come across a particular bug within Magento that affected your M1 site, and it wasn't something that was really a platform bug, so you didn't get solved by a patch from support, but you fixed it in a certain way, and it may be completely irrelevant in Magento too. So again, get those out. What we see now is to execute that tool against the code base. You have an opportunity here if you've gotten some development experience with the tool. You can perhaps customize the tool and contribute that back. What we've seen on our several implementations is you see the development of the tools in the public GitHub. That's the result of executing it against a code base. And instead of fixing the resulted code, fix the tool so that the result is better. And you can actually save time that we've seen. A lot of cases where changing the tool, because it'll affect 80 different places in the code, is much faster than making that change. So you have an opportunity here that we would recommend, and on our side, contributing back improvements to the tool. Please go ahead and make those changes within the tool. But again, you've migrated them over to your Magento 2 code base. This is a full process. You could do 1 or 2 extensions at a time, or you can do the full list of your extensions. Disable them in Magento 2, commit them, and then one by one work your way through those modules, enabling them. Again, using your dependency mapping, you know which ones are related to others. Enable them one at a time, test, fix, and implement that module. So again, this is available on GitHub. And my colleague Sergey Shimko presented at Imagine in April on this. So you'll see this slides are available here, and the video of his entire presentation is there. You'll see the tool itself has two different scripts which perform 6 different functions. So I do recommend you watch the video to get a better understanding of how to use the tool. And we're improving the process as much as we can, but it's available there, and I think it's relatively straightforward once you watch the video. So you've gotten through your development process, and now you're ready for QA, right? This is about your UAT steps. Are you going to document exactly the results of this? So what's the client going to do? How are they going to do their testing? What's the results? Who's pass, fail? Checking the overall progress of the tests, your integration tests, your end-to-end tests where you're taking orders, putting them all the way through your system. Do you have that third party? Can you mock your third-party integration possibly to test it? What is your approach and how do you do it and track it? So again, deployment is something that I recommend is done as early as possible in a development process. So basically, get your deployment process and your build process nailed down. You don't have to worry about it for the rest of the project. I think it's very critical that you don't deal with issues with your deployment as you're getting into UAT and production launch. So from this, you've got the cutover, right? So this is with a simple breakdown of tasks that we see within going to an environment change. So you've done your staging and your production cutover. This should be an ordered list of steps, something that is clearly shared with the entire team. Who's doing what and when, what are their dependencies, who needs to do what first, and as it's completed, does it get finished? So I think, again, this cutover process should be practiced. As we talked about with the data migration, you know how long it's going to take, what's your outage going to look like, what's the steps that need to be taken, when are we going to perform this. These are all things that should go forward with your process. And now you're live on your production site. So this is what our approach is for getting that migration and successfully going from M1 to M2. What I've been able to do within the projects as what I'm learning from our third-party team, from all of our clients that we're working with, I'm sharing back with our product team. So It's been a very interesting process. Everybody's got their own challenges with Magento and Magento 2. So please I'll open it up for some questions here, and be also sure to share with the rest of us throughout today. Do we have any questions in the room on migration in Magento 2? Yeah?
Yeah, sorry. In Magento 2, you mentioned when you're actually deploying changes to it that it's got downtime. What is this?
Well, there's the Magento 2 framework does several. There's a more advanced way to customize the framework using dependency injection, it's called. And it has a step that does automatic code generation to support that. And so that would be a step which in real time would be a delay to the site. So we've introduced a compilation step that will take that code from generations of factories, plugins, interceptors, these things that are the key customization mechanisms of Magento 2 need to be pre-generated, as well as your view files get created in a compilation step. So if you're doing that, and that can be done in advance without downtime, but if you aren't approaching your project that way, the only way to support it would be to have a downtime, essentially maintenance page up while you're doing your compilation. So we don't recommend that. We recommend you create a build in advance. Yep, in the back.
A quick question about the data migration tool, because it's usually behind the Magento versions. And for example, right now we know the Magento 2.1 is going to be released soon. Is the data migration tool going to be released as well?
So the data migration tool is on the next sprint that I know of. So I don't believe on release day for 2.1 the data migration tool will be ready for it. But it is a priority within the team to support 2.1, of course. So I think initially no, but shortly thereafter. Data migration tool has a different release cycle than the main framework. So we should see updates to the tool shortly after. Yep.
Magento 2, besides using Composer to start the framework, you always keep using the Composer for all live deployment as well. It's just framework.
Okay, so the question was about using Composer, and do you use Composer while you're live through production? So yes, I recommend that you use Composer for your project. And in my recommended repository structure, you would only have your custom files. You don't need to commit your third-party dependencies to your code base. But it introduces a real-time dependency on third-party code repositories. So again, we got that build step. So the build step, which would be the process to connect to the third party. It wouldn't be a live deployment that might be taken out by a third-party repository that wasn't available. Similarly, if you were doing a rollback scenario or a package that ideally you can create a package for your staging environment, test, UAT gets passed there, you're just moving that same package to production. So there's no impact on a third-party dependency. So that's the approach I would recommend. Yep.
In your experience, if you've got you're converting a well-written, clean Magento 1 module, what sort of percentage of the work does the code migration tool do, roughly? Just so we give clients an expectation of we can do most of this work in X time automatically.
Yeah. It's a hard question to answer. It depends a lot on how the extension was built. If you've got something that was using events in Magento 1 and you're converting it to a plugin perhaps today on Magento 2, simpler than something that has rewritten classes within Magento 1 and has a lot of Magento 1 business logic in its functions. So I hesitate to really give a number, but like I said, the plumbing component, the configuration of Magento 2, the creation of XML files, that speed up is quite good from a developer's experience, not having to go through and it's just rote translation of M1 way to M2. Sorry, I can't give a better answer than that, but we've seen some very quick extensions and we've seen some that didn't quite do much with the tools, and there's lots more work in the custom code. Questions? More questions? Yep.
From a QA point of view, the unit test coverage and the Selenium test what you have, what percentage of coverage does it give, and how confident can I be, and how easy is it to run them, to get up and running with the unit tests and the Selenium tests?
So unit tests is a very high level of coverage. Like we said, the definition of done for development in our methodology required unit tests. So you see very good coverage there. Integration tests are little less than unit tests, but very complete. And by integration, we mean how one class interacts with another. Functional testing, like the testing framework, I don't have a solid understanding of exactly the coverage. I would say the catalog and the checkout experience are fully covered from our side of things. But around the My Account section, that might be a different story. The test framework for Magento 2 and functional testing is also available online. And I would say go into that as well with your approach to testing. You've got the profiles within the performance test tool of Magento, the ability to define yourself as a small merchant with 1,000 SKUs, or are you a large merchant with 400,000 SKUs? We have profiles within the testing framework of Magento that can create fixtures and build out a database that has a large number of products and SKUs to do your tests against, to get some understanding of the performance impacts to your tests. Any other questions? Yeah?
Clarity on data migration tool, it's always going to be from a source database to a target database. There's no in-place migration.
Correct. It's always from one to another. Yeah. The tool it handles core fields, core tables and columns that are in those tables, but custom tables, you need to create a mapping of where they're going from one to another. The tool is quite powerful with even adding in transformations during that step if you require it. But basically, you create this definition, again, back up your system before you begin and start that process forward. I say the one thing that I would point out with the data migration tool is it migrates the data. It doesn't migrate the schema. So if you've got a third-party, your custom module, which creates 2 tables, creates a couple of indexes, this type of thing needs to be done before you run the data migration tool. So if you're looking at your upgrade and your setup scripts, do you have 38 upgrade scripts that you've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 as your schema has evolved? If you're going to do your Magento 2 migration, your Magento 2 module, the code migration tools doesn't take those setup scripts for you, so you're going to redefine your schema. You do it in one place, right, and not with 38 steps. So something that's a little bit of a trick to the data migration. We're talking data, not schema. Great question. Yeah.
Question side. Is data migration to support M2E Pro table? Because we know Magento is part of eBay now. So does it support M2E Pro tables on the database as well?
No, it's just Magento framework tables. Yeah, Community Edition and Enterprise Edition. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Again, if you have any questions for me, see me throughout the rest of the show, or hit me on Twitter or GitHub. So, thank you very much.
Great. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Doug McKeever. I'm Director of Product Management at Magento, and I'm going to be doing an overview of the Magento Enterprise Cloud Edition and some of the capabilities and technologies that we're using to deliver this solution. So to start with, what we wanted to do is really pull together leading technologies. We looked at a number of partners to find robust, established technologies and pull them together into a out-of-the-box turnkey solution that allows you to deliver Magento Enterprise Edition in a cloud environment that scales, that's robust, handles things like deployment and DevOps activities so that as developers, you can really focus on customizing Magento and not on the deployment workflows. Really trying to take those pieces and make them so that they're not a concern either for you or for your merchants. So as we stepped back and we looked at what we were trying to do, first of all, we were trying to provide a very differentiated solution, really leveraging what Magento is known for and enabling you to do the types of customizations, the types of tailoring that you do for merchants, really the things that differentiate Magento in the marketplace. Also, as part of that, we tried to pull together our learnings that we've had from all the Magento deployments that we've been involved with, everything our ECG group knows about deployments and best practices, all the performance optimizations, and sort of package those up in such a way that everyone was getting a consistent experience with the Magento platform. And as I said, we wanted to do this with leading technologies, really things that we thought were robust, were established in the marketplace, and had been proven, so that we had a really secure, really robust, really performant solution. A big part of that was looking at how we could have efficient and repeatable deployment processes. So you'll see as we walk through some of the partner technologies that we've bundled together and pre-integrated, how we've sort of enabled that. And finally, at the end of the day, what we're trying to deliver with this is peace of mind, right? How do merchants know that their site's going to be up and available? How do they know that it's going to be scalable, both in the short term for spikes and also for the long term as their businesses grow? And that they're going to get the support around the monitoring, the redundancy, the uptime, a really robust SLA to deliver a great solution. And so with that, we really looked at what we thought would deliver a full stack for Magento. And this was everything from the servers through to the CDN and the development tools. We found great partners for this. So we'll walk through these, everything from Fastly for the CDN. A large part of the capabilities is a platform as a service offering, where we've included technology from platform.sh, which is a leading PHP-focused platform as a service company, and built on top of Amazon Web Services. So let's dive into these and get a little sense of what we took from each. So for the cloud infrastructure, we selected Amazon Web Services. They're obviously a leader in this area. They have great technology, really allow you to elastically provision and scale sites. They provide us a global presence, which is very important to us, given that we support customers around the world. And really have been a great partner for us in terms of providing the core infrastructure for the offering. As I said, you have a lot of flexibility with how and where the cloud deployments are deployed. You can deploy into any Amazon region with the exception of the GovCloud, which is just for US government purposes, and the Chinese regions. We may be looking at the Chinese regions in the future, but there's some extra overhead with working with those. So for the production instances, they can be in basically any of the other regions here. The numbers in the center of the circles is the number of availability zones or data centers within that region. And we have a high availability deployment that will sit in up to 3 availability zones within a region. And I'll go into a little bit more detail what that architecture looks like in just a minute. So the next key piece of the technology stack is really the tools that we wanted to give to developers to have automated and repeated deployments, really trying to be more efficient, allow developers to be more agile in the process. I'll walk through sort of how the technology supports that with some examples in just a second. But it's really trying to create a repeatable, predictable deployment workflow. When you're deploying your code, it's going into a read-only file system for all of the executable code. So there's no chance that the code that's in production is any different than what's in the source control system, no chance that anything was hot-fixed and is colliding with some other change that you've made. It's really designed to support the testing and acceptance process, and show that in just a second. And it's really trying to automate a lot of DevOps-like activities. Everything is driven out of the source control system, all the configuration, all the provisioning of services. So with that, let's see if I can get this to work this time. So one of the key features of platform.sh is, first of all, it's all driven off Git or some Git server. So we don't have a lot of branches here, but what you have on the left here is a mirror of your of a Git server. This is something that can be hosted in GitHub, Bitbucket, or a locally hosted Git server, and then gets mirrored in the application. And one of the primary functionalities that you have here is you're able to create a full stack running instance of Magento in a matter of minutes. And you can use this for, it really enables you to have a separate instance for every branch in your Git repository. So as you're developing, you can have a feature on a branch. You can bring up a full stack instance of that, be able to review that, do acceptance testing, run automated tests against that. And it's really sort of the key piece of the platform.sh technology is the ability to have these instances just created on the fly for you. So with every Magento Enterprise Cloud Edition account, you get up to 8 active running instances that can be used at the same time. Other branches in the repository can be inactive. And if you need more, we can provision more for you. I have to apologize for the videos not working there. I actually had some demos here. So as I said, the real focus on this is really on the testing, acceptance, and then the deployment to staging and production. Right now, we're not providing things that will help with local development tools. That is an area of focus in the roadmap, both for Magento 2 and for our partner platform.sh, so we'll be providing better support in those areas moving forward. But it is really trying to get you to the point of once you've done local development, how can you get that? How can you test that against production data with production files in a very seamless way, taking away any contention for different environments. So you don't have to schedule time on a staging or testing server. You can just create the instances you need for those processes. One of the great things about this is, as I said, each of these instances have their own URLs. You have direct access to that. You can control the access to those URLs with HTTP auth and whitelists of IP. Those can be set up without the needs of using a sysadmin. It's just in the UI or in the command line tool, you can sort of control those capabilities. Another key piece is SSH access. You do have access to get onto the boxes. You don't have root access, but you do have access to get on, to look at logs, to understand what's going on. That's true both in the PaaS environment and in the production environment. So it's really trying to enable developers and not get in their way and giving you the access that you need. Another key capability of the PaaS environment is the ability to synchronize data. So data gets synchronized from the production environment to the PaaS environment on a regular basis, like a nightly basis. That can include running a script to scrub any personally identifiable information and really sanitize the data for use in the development process. And then from there, you can synchronize data to basically any of the instances, any of the branches, if you will, that you have. So this is capability that is exposed in the UI. You can specify that you want to synchronize either the code or the data and files to the branch you're working in. And the goal here is really to allow you to test against as close a copy of production as possible. So if you're doing acceptance with a merchant, they can be looking at their actual production files with the production database that's been scrubbed and really get a sense of what the features you're developing. Is it meeting the needs that you have, the requirements you've been given? So a lot of the support the PaaS gives is really trying to enable developers to get the focus on development, not on system setup and other pieces. So you have a lot of ability to control the environment you're working in. All these configurations are stored in YAML files that are checked into the repository and interpreted by build and deploy scripts that provision these services for you. So here we have an example. You get to define the version of PHP you're running against. We strongly recommend PHP 7 for Magento 2, but it also supports PHP 5.5 and 5.6. You can define which PHP extensions you want to have loaded, and then other additional services that you want to have provisioned for you. So rather than having to install MySQL, rather than having to install Redis, those are provisioned for you during the build and deploy process in separate containers. This is the set of technologies that we're working with and that you have available to you. It's supporting Nginx, PHP 7, which again is strongly recommended. It's running MySQL 10, which is a MariaDB and a Galera cluster in the production environment. This is how we're providing a high availability solution for the production environment. A couple flavors of Redis, Solr, Elasticsearch, which again is going to be our recommended search option starting with Magento 2.1, which is being released very shortly. And then RabbitMQ for a queuing system. Again, we're really trying to provide all the services that you need to work with Magento 2. Okay, so Not just a command line, we actually do have a command line interface. The great capability here is basically anything you can do in the UI for the PaaS environment, you can also do from the command line. And so this means either from your local machine or in a script, you can run any of the commands. There's quite a long list of things you can do here. You can synchronize code, you can spin up instances, you can identify what instances are available. All of those types of activities can be done, again, from your local machine, from the command line. The great thing about this is it makes it so you can include it in a testing process or in other automated processes by scripting it. So you can spin up an instance and run automated tests against that instance. That's an area where we're going to look for additional opportunities to include better tooling and other support for automated testing. But even now, you can use those instances in that process. You can use it for quickly deploying from your local machine, pushing code from your local Git or GitHub source control into the system, synchronizing code back down. All those things can be handled through this interface. All right, so we also have a robust integration with the production environment. So you basically push to a remote Git server, which is the source of truth for the production environment. That production environment has a 99.99% availability SLA, and that covers the full hosting stack. So that covers the availability of Redis, MySQL, all of those services that are provisioned, in addition to the servers, the connectivity to the internet, and those pieces. It's deployed in a triple redundant architecture. I think I have a slide about that coming up, but that basically means that we can scale up, do code deploys, or also be redundant to any Amazon outages in let's see, 1 or up to 2 availability zones, depending on which region you've deployed in. And as part of that, we're providing 24/7 monitoring of that environment, so any issues that will be addressed will be identified and addressed by the support team. You can also contact the support team, and there's an SLA on responses. For P1 issues, I believe it's less than an hour, 24/7 as well. So here we have a view of the architecture. You can sort of see the way the deployment works is you're deployed onto 3 separate servers that are each in different data centers. Each of those server instances has the full stack for Magento and is load balanced across those. So you have Nginx running PHP in the Magento application. You have the caching layer with Redis. You have Solar and Elastic that are deployed across those. And then the database, which is a Galera database that's synchronized across those 3 instances. Backup and storage is done on a regular basis. I believe it's every 6 hours and stored for 14 days, and that's stored in Amazon S3. And then we have the DNS and the CDN sitting in front of these to really try and provide a high availability, highly performant solution. Now, each of these servers can be scaled up in a process that takes about 15 minutes. That can either be done based on observed load on the servers, or it can be done for scheduled events. If you have sales, merchandising events, planned events that are coming up, it can be done in advance to be ready for those. The basic process is replacing each of those servers with a larger instance size, so you can double the full capacity of the stack in about 15 minutes, and that can go from anywhere from a setup that has 12 CPUs up to a setup that has 96 CPUs. For larger or more complicated deployments, there can be sort of more custom or bespoke deployments as well with different topologies, but this is sort of our out-of-the-box reference that we use for most customers. Another key part that's very important to us is really leveraging the flexibility of the Magento application. So you're working with the Magento Enterprise Edition code base. As part of the fees for the service, you're getting access to the Enterprise Edition. It's not an additional add-on. You don't have to have a separate enterprise license. It's just part of the cloud offering. We're very committed to making sure that we stay with the same code base. It's very important to us to have customers have the flexibility to make the right decisions for themselves. And so if they start with a deployment that is not on the cloud and they want to come to our cloud, that's great. They should be able to bring their code. Same thing is if they started on the cloud edition and for some reason find that it's not the right solution for them, we want them to be able to transport that off. So it's not just data migration, but really full code migration on and off, so you can take your full website with you. It's a key piece. And we really want to make sure that we're not limiting the flexibility and customization options that are available. So this should work with all themes, all custom modules, really trying to give you the full flexibility of Magento 2. In addition, to help make sure that we're delivering a great experience for the end user and for the merchant, we're providing some performance management tools that are bundled as part of the offering. This is really to ensure that the application is performing well, that any customizations that you're working on are performing as expected. The two main ones are New Relic, which is an application performance monitoring tool, and Blackfire.io. New Relic is great for monitoring the production environment, setting up alerts, making sure there are no application errors, being notified about those in addition to the support and monitoring that we're providing. And then Blackfire.io is a great tool for developers. It really allows you to do two main things. One is you can do performance profiling. And the way that Blackfire works, you can actually do performance profiling on the production environment without impacting the performance. Basically, it gets enabled for the session for the developer. And they can do the profiling on the production environment without it impacting the traffic that's serving the end users of the site. It also allows you to set up tests and assertions that can be used during the build process to make sure that your performance expectations are being met as you release new code. So another key part of the stack is Fastly. We chose Fastly because it integrates very, very nicely with the Magento 2 page cache. Fastly is a varnish-based CDN. It basically allows us to take the Magento 2 page cache and push that out to the edge locations. So rather than having a varnish server at the origin, you effectively have varnish caches that can be stored in all the points of presence that Fastly supports around the world. You get full customization of that as you would with Varnish, so you can publish custom VCLs or Varnish configuration language files. And this enables a lot of interesting opportunities about combining content at the edge, putting logic out at the edge sites. I've heard of some interesting use cases where people actually combine things like WordPress content and Magento content at the edge using this type of technology. And again, the main driver for selecting this was we looked at a lot of CDNs, but they were really the one that supported the Magento page cache really seamlessly out of the box. So they purge instantly across the network. It works in the same way it would with the local Varnish server for the Magento 2 page cache. And so it seemed like a natural fit for us as we were looking for options in this space. All right. And so that was really the goals that we had with deploying the Magento Enterprise Cloud Edition. It was really trying to have a tighter relationship with both you and with our merchants, really providing the flexibility and customization options that Magento supports. It's key to us in this regard, providing the ability to have those elastic resources to scale up and scale down, to grow with the merchant as they have both new features and new requirements, as well as in changes in the resources that they need. It supported our global audience. They're in Europe right now. You have the ability to deploy into either Dublin or Frankfurt. And there's going to be a new AWS data center opening in London very shortly. And then really trying to provide the reliability and assurance of the full hosting stack SLA and the 24/7 monitoring and support. I'd like to open up for questions if people have about the Cloud Edition, the different components, or anything else people would like to ask about. Are there any questions? Yes?
On the architecture side, you have multiple servers. How do you deal with sort of asset files which aren't in Git and get uploaded by the application?
Yeah, so we're using GlusterFS to synchronize the data, synchronize the file system across those 3 servers. So you have this synchronized file system across them using that technology. All right? Yes?
Do you choose the location of the data center, or is it based on areas of market presence?
So the merchant gets to decide which data center they want their production environment in. For the PaaS environment, right now we have PaaS environments that are set up in North America and one that's set up in, I believe it's in Frankfurt. And we're going to be adding one in the not too distant future for the Australian market. So for the development tools, you have to pick one of the available ones. For the production environment, you have access to any of the AWS regions. And that's something that's at your discretion or the merchant's discretion. Why don't we start here?
So the resources for the dev branches, do they come out of the client's resource bills for their live site, or is that separately out?
So what we've tried to do from a pricing perspective is get as close as we can to an all-inclusive fee. So the price that you're paying includes access to the PaaS environment and the use of that, the production resources for the production environment, including what we think is a generous allowance of capacity if you have to, for surges where you have to scale up, and CDN capacity. Now, it is possible, we're trying to find the right balance between affordability and not having to worry about about variable fees. So there is the possibility of having to pay additional fees for additional server capacity or for the CDN. But the PaaS environment is just sort of covered as part of the fees that you have, that you're paying for. All right.
You've not chosen to use Amazon's RDS service?
So the technology that we selected with platform.sh is fairly cloud agnostic. And so right now we're sort of leveraging that. We're not leveraging any of the, very much of the AWS specific solutions, but that's certainly something we'll look at over time. RDS is a great solution. Aurora, we've seen some great results with. And so right now we're pretty much using, not relying on any of the AWS services specifically, but that may change in the future as we look for other offerings. Part of the reason we were interested in having something that's agnostic is, as we learn, particularly for the European market, there may be reasons to support other clouds, and we have that option here. Certain markets obviously are more sensitive around personally identifiable information and want to make sure that's secure, and we have the option of looking at that in the future as well with this technology stack. Yeah.
So you mentioned you've got Fastly for the CDN area. If you've got super large clients that maybe need to have databases closer to specific markets, say Europe, the US, the Far East, are you looking at options for how you can span AWS locations as well?
So that's something, so Magento just natively doesn't really support geographically distributed deployments. That's something that we'll certainly be looking at in the roadmap to see if and when it makes sense to include, but we haven't done anything differently here. So in that situation, you would either have to serve them out of a single instance or have multiple instances that were synchronized through some other process. So those are the options that you have. And that's basically the same as you would have with any Magento deployment at this point. Another question right here? Yeah.
If you're using other performance monitoring tools, like similar to New Relic, but not New Relic,
right,
would you be able to deploy those on the server as well?
We'd have to talk to see. I mean, for our teams, we're using Nagios that ties into PagerDuty and some of the other technologies for monitoring the server environment. Right now, we're not exposing those to externally, but that is something that we'll look at. Certainly, we know that a lot of our partners, a lot of developers provide a very high level of service to their customers already and want to be notified as soon as there's any issue. And so we'll look at what the right ways to open those up over time are. If there's a specific technology that you feel is important and you have a customer you think would be a good fit, we can talk about it to see if it's something that we can support. We do have the ability to deploy other things into the environment, but we really want to make sure we're doing that in a calculated way. Yes?
What's been the uptake on this? How many times have you switched to it so far?
So we're getting really, really good interest. We launched this at Imagine. Our first customer should be going live very, very shortly. I believe they're actually talking in the afternoon session on the main stage. And we're seeing really good interest so far. It really seems like it's resonating. That said, you have sales cycles and deployment and projects, so it'll be a little while before people actually start rolling out. But as I say, the first one should be rolling out in the next couple weeks. Yes?
You briefly touched on it, actually, if you could elaborate a bit more. When you clone, when you sync, when you clone an environment,
right,
what control do you have over it? I'm thinking you don't want your freshly cloned production database to start updating some order management system in the background.
Yeah, so one of the other things that wasn't shown here, but I think I had a demo of, is so you have the ability to set environment variables that could be inherited for all those Git branches. And so those can change configurations and other settings. So you can, for example, if you need to change from production credentials to sandbox credentials, or even different versions of sandbox credentials. That can all be set up. The application of those settings is something that's handled by the build and deploy scripts. So in the PaaS environment, you set up the environmental variables, and then the build and deploy scripts will actually apply those settings, does some things about moving files back and forth and out of the way.
The build and deploy scripts, can you control them? Do they come out of your Git repository, or are they something that's managed by?
There's something that come out of our Git repository, but you could fork them and modify them as necessary. There's certainly valid use cases for doing that, so we can provide them as references that you could use on top of to customize. The whole system is based on Composer, so that was one of the things that really appealed to us about platform.sh is you're actually running Composer to do all the dependency management, and it's a key part of the build and deploy process. And then the other pieces that the build and deploy script really handles are those configuration changes, making sure that as you're moving between environments, you're getting this sort of expected configurations.
Composer lets you override other people's composer modules, replace them. Is that something that's potential?
Yeah, completely. I mean, you can modify the Composer files. You can update those to make sure that they're working with your project. The build and deploy scripts does do some things with moving things like enview.php out of the way, running Composer, moving it back into place. So there are various examples of things like that that are done.
If your agency used Composer to build the website,
right.
Is there a conflict with platform.sh's Composer running your Composer?
No, I mean, there are some requirements for working with this. I mean, you do have to have, there are a couple things around how your Git project is set up. We do have a skeleton project that's on our GitHub repository that has the right file structure. It also has the example configuration files already in the right places. That's the structure that you need to run with the build and deploy scripts. And so you would certainly need to make sure you're sort of aligned with those types of things, but it should be fairly easy to move across. I mean, the early customers we had were actually customers who were already in Magento 2 builds and decided to go on the cloud edition, so they've moved their process across. Yeah?
Is that possible to keep an eye on the performances in production?
Yeah, so you definitely have access to New Relic that can give you performance information. You can also use Blackfire as a profiling tool, and then we have monitoring that we're using internally as well. And as I said, we'll look for opportunities if there's a demand for how we can expose more of that to our partners. So.
How can developers access log files?
So right now, you have SSH access to get onto the service to look at log files. And we're actually looking at a sort of a log aggregation technology that would streamline that process. But for both the PaaS environment and the production environment, you do have non-root SSH access onto the machines. So you can see what's going on directly there. Let's get some new. Yeah?
How easy will it be to test the code base against the new version of PHP or new version of Magento?
Yeah, so I mean, the basic process would be, if it's a new version of PHP, let's say, it's updating the YAML file to reference the new version, and then building, starting off in the PaaS environment, spinning up a new instance, doing your acceptance testing against that. Same with applying patches or updates to Magento. You'd branch, be able to spin up an instance, review that all before you're sort of merging it forward. So that's really the type of workflow we want to enable. And we want to look at ways to really streamline the patching process. So how much of that could we start by automating the testing process and then adding in automatic notification, like being able to basically spin off a branch, create an instance, run tests, and notify you of the results so that you can go in and investigate and do any further acceptance. Yeah.
So the flexibility in the backup mechanism, you mentioned like 6 hours, can you make it more granular?
That's something I'll have to follow up on. I know that it's the standard process is, I think, a 6-hour backup, and then it gets preserved for 14 days. If that's a critical requirement, we can talk more about that.
Do you have any guidelines on costings?
So we have given guidance. So we don't have a price sheet, per se, right? We do feel like we have a very competitive price for what we're offering and the level of service. That said, with the triple redundancy, there is more cost than if you're just hosting on a single machine somewhere. It is very competitive to what we think you would get for paying for Enterprise Edition and then taking it and hosting it for an equivalent level of service. So we're trying to be very competitive on that front. So if we get a little bit of sizing information, working with either a partner or with our sales reps, we can get you pricing very quickly. We have some tools in place to do that for the sales team. All right.
We have your demo videos if you'd like to play them out.
Would people like to see them? Okay, so here we're showing the ability to sort of create branches within the PaaS environment. So again, you can be working with either the mirror here or on your local machine. When it's creating that branch, it is actually running through the build and deploy process and spinning up the full stack running instances. You know, the goal is really to enable sort of a very agile deployment methodology or development methodology where you can be working on feature branches, have a process to sort of merge those feature branches up into either sprints or release branches. You do have the ability to set branch level permissions within the system. So if you want it, you can have very tight controls as opposed to with Git where you have repository level permissions. So if you want to control who actually can merge into a staging or release branch, you can do that. You can also, if you're working with third-party teams, you can control who has access to those. Basically, the way that the environment variables get inherited, you can limit controls to those types of things too. So you can make sure people don't have access to different environments and who's sending, who has access to various pieces. So basically you do have, as I say, you do have the ability to sort of control, access, this is basically all the information you see in the PaaS environment. So here's the list of all the branches that were sort of created in that other example. Here's a list of all the commands you have access to. There's certainly a lot here. There's a lot. We have information on devdocs.magento.com about how to both set up and work with this tool. Lets you do things like do snapshots, create SSH tunnels, branch, clone, synchronize files, synchronize the code base down. You can do that either with command line tools or with Git commands that you're provided. So it's really trying to enable you to work the way you want to. So if you want to be on your local machine, you can be working with those types of pieces as well. And really trying to have a nice seamless workflow that letting you support the workflow that you want. So that's really all I have at this point. If there are any more questions, I'm happy to take questions afterwards. I appreciate your time, and thank you for attending.